Hey friends, welcome to the School of Hard Knocks with Darcie, a place where we become unstuck from trauma and grounded in our healing. I'm your host, Darcie, and I'm a proud multi-graduate of the School of Hard Knocks. Life has a way of teaching us lessons we never asked for, but here we take those lessons and turn them into healing, strength, and self-leadership. I'm so glad you're here. Let's dive in.
Just a quick reminder. This podcast shares personal stories and lived experiences. It's not therapy. It's not counseling or legal advice. If you need professional help, please reach out to a licensed provider. Hey, School of Hard Knocks, welcome back. Class is in session. I am here with my Rebuild series. We are currently in our season in blooming. Our guest today is Mark Light. Mark, welcome to the School of Hard Knocks.
Thank you, Darcie. Good to be with you.
So happy to have you here. Well, let me introduce you guys to Mark before we get started. Mark says that he has worn many professional hats in his life, from financial advisor to sales trainer to roofing contractor. Most recently, he is the founder of the Mark Light Group, a soft skills organization that helps people better deal with and prepare for significant hardship, both in and out of the workplace. In January of 2025, he authored his first book entitled Rock Bottom to Resilient. Transform your mind and become unshakable when the shit hits the fan, which I think we could all relate to some degree. He is also a board member for the Central Indiana chapter of the National Football Foundation and was the co-founder of the Pancreatitis Foundation. Mark has lived the last several years of his life by a 3-word mantra: adventure, resilience, inspire. Okay. And now he calls himself as the healthiest unhealthy guy in the world. Whoa, Mark, there's a little bit of, take your suitcases out. We're going to unpack some stuff.
Yes.
Awesome.
There's a little bit there.
Lots of really great stuff. Well, take me back to the beginning. What started the snowball rolling to get to where we are here today?
Wow. Well, as in the intro there, that you mentioned, founder of the Pancreatitis Foundation. Well, what that and pancreatitis, for people who don't know what that is, it's an exceptionally painful and high morbidity and mortality rate, more deadly than all but a few types of cancer. I started a kind of a 13 or so year off again, on again battle with that disease starting in about almost 25 years ago in 2002. And that resulted in a particularly ugly, difficult turn back in 2007. Well, then after I got well again, my surgeon and the surgeon who treated me and operated on me to kind of clean up some of the infection of like I said, a particularly difficult turn of that illness, we formed a foundation together. And that was one of the major dominoes that sort of transformed my mind. And that came back to pay dividends. And I've had some incredible experiences from doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine. I mean, anybody who's gone through any type of cancer, right? I mean, what a scary thing to have to, first of all, hear it and go through that. So let's talk about that a little bit. When you first were initially diagnosed, what were symptoms? How long was it before things were actually uncovered?
Yeah, so the pancreatitis was not, the cancer diagnosis didn't come till later, and it was completely unrelated to the pancreatitis. In fact, I would have thought if I was going to get cancer, it would have been pancreatic cancer, which is basically a death sentence. But for the cancer, it's kind of funny. I wasn't diagnosed with that until August of 2022, which was many years later. And mixed in between there, I just had a sort of a garden variety bacterial meningitis scare, just sort of mixed in there just to keep things sort of interesting. But no, to answer your question, Darcie, I'd had symptoms building up for, gosh, looking back on it, probably longer than a year prior to my diagnosis. In fact, um, I would say, well, the day that I went to the emergency room with severe belly pain, which is the exact same thing that took me to the emergency room with pancreatitis, but it was a different type of belly pain. I actually Googled colon cancer symptoms before I went to the hospital back in 2022, and an article popped up with I can't remember, 7, 8, or 9 bullet point listed symptoms, and I had all of them. So the natural question would be, why didn't you go to a doctor sooner? Well, denial is a pretty powerful force when it comes to certain things. So yeah, I was diagnosed with colon cancer, stage 4 colon cancer. By the time I'd received my diagnosis, it already spread to my liver. So things weren't exactly looking up with that at that point in time. But managed to, well, I was living in San Antonio, Texas at the time. I'm from the Indianapolis area. Most of my life spent here. First thing I did was move back up here to be closer to blood relatives and Indiana University Health, which had treated me all the way through my pancreatitis and other issues. I wanted to be close to them because I had a lot of confidence in that medical system.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I think that it's probably a lot more relatable to people than what we even think when it comes to the word denial. Because
mhm.
that is, such an easy thing to fall into. And it's not always, denial of is there actually an issue? It's kind of blaming it on something else. I mean, I know for women in particular, a heart palpitation or a night sweat can be, oh, I'm perimenopausal, like things like that. I'm going through the change. And it's, well, ma'am, if there's other things happening, you could potentially be having a heart problem. But so many people are like, no, not me. Or this doesn't run in my family, or that couldn't be. Is this something that actually runs in your family?
Well, I did lose my dad to cancer about 13 years ago, but it was a totally different type of cancer than what I had. He passed from multiple myeloma. So no, cancer doesn't. I wouldn't say it really runs in my family any more than it runs in, I think, everybody's family. You just, one of the things I've learned is it's amazing. There's a word for this phenomenon that I don't recall at the moment, but you get diagnosed with cancer, and then it feels like everybody you meet has cancer. It seems like
Mhm.
sort of like buying a certain type of car, and then
I was
that's all
just
you
gonna
see in
say,
the
no,
world.
everyone's got a red car all of a sudden.
Yeah, yeah. So no, cancer doesn't, other than that phenomenon occurring here, cancer doesn't run in my family. But that said, it does kind of, after a certain while, it feels like, well, if anybody was going to get a cancer diagnosis, it was going to be me. Um,
Mhm.
and so,
Yeah.
not that that's, I mean, because again, I see much more good than bad that's come from this. And that's saying something because it has been very much a walk through hell, at times at least.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, my stepdad actually was diagnosed with colon cancer,
Hmm.
and he survived that in the surgery. However, he had a heart attack
Oh,
a little over a week, I would say, about a week after having the surgery done. And he already had a heart attack earlier in life. But upon calling and talking to the doctor, even telling them that he had pressure in his chest before he left, it was you have trapped gas in there and you have to just let it. And here he was actually having a massive heart attack. So,
yeah.
things like that, it just, unless if you are reminded of it, advocating for yourself and making sure that you don't always take a doctor's answer as gold, that's a really big thing. So I can tell that you have experience with that, Mark, so please share.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that, Darcie, because I totally didn't expect this topic to come up, but I think it's a very important one. As I mentioned previously, I moved back to Indiana to get my cancer treatment at Indiana University Health. I've received, I mean, I'm only sitting here talking to you now because I've received almost 25 years worth of world-class healthcare from a world-class healthcare organization. And yet, that being said, had I blindly followed doctor's orders, which a lot of people do, I would have been dead at least 3 separate times by now. So being able to advocate for oneself through healthcare is it's it's almost too critical of a thing it can't be overstated enough. We are hardwired, most of us don't even really have the knowledge necessary to self-advocate. The only reason I do is because my ex-wife, who was with me during the entirety of my pancreatitis issues, she's practically an MD herself. She's in the medical field. I learned a lot about advocating. She was sort of there handling all of the difficult questions for me, but I learned from that. So very few people actually have the knowledge that I was fortunate enough to get. And of that subset of people, a very small percentage of them, I think, have the personality, if you will, to advocate for themselves. And what I mean by that is, doctors and medical people are very much authority figures. And they're also a group of professionals who don't like to be questioned. And when questions come up or pushback does come up, they don't usually warmly receive that type of thing. There's a little bit of a, hey, I know better than you. Your job as the patient is to sit down. That, like, I feel like I've had the best doctors and the best medical people in the entire world. They don't like to be questioned, and yet that's what I do. And so I don't, I can identify the problem much more than I can the solution, just because I just mentioned that, unfortunately, most people don't have the knowledge. I don't know that it's something that requires a ton of knowledge, but you do have to push back. You do have to second guess your doctors. You do have to get second opinions wherever possible. And that's even in this health insurance climate we live in these days. That's not always such an easy thing to do because of the way health insurance works. But question everything. Be the type of person, or put somebody in your corner who does have the personality and willingness to question. And that doesn't mean get confrontational at all. That's not what I mean. It just means question. And it's just supremely important.
Yeah, I mean, I'll share a little bit of something with you
Yeah.
because I have had to get confrontational. So if that's what it takes to get what you need, because all in all, these are medical professionals, but at the end of the day, we're paying for it,
Right.
so they still have to respect. So my dad was a survivor of a workplace shooting that had happened in our area.
Oh,
This
wow. Okay.
workplace shooting resulted in him having a traumatic brain injury.
Oh
So
my
at the
God.
age of 39, I became my dad's caregiver. He unfortunately passed away in our home 7 months ago after we took care of him for almost 4 years in our home. It was a phenomenal, very hard, humbling experience. But every time I had to, even from the start when my dad was
Sorry.
first shot, the way that we had to advocate for him, right? And like talk to the doctors about all of the things. And I remember one doctor in particular, he was just very, if this was me, I wouldn't want my children to trach and peg me and give me a chance at life. And I said, well, and I think that's really great that that's what your choice is for yourself, but we're not talking about what your choice is. We're talking about what I'm choosing to do for my dad. So he gave me a couple of days to think about it, and I did decide to give my dad a
Right.
chance at life. And I'll never forget how mad that this doctor got. He actually slammed the door directly in my face. I changed his name. His name was Dr. Wild. I started calling him Dr. Dick. So nobody was like relating, like, who are you talking to? We don't have him. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. So I had to fight. I was like, no, we're not doing that. Same thing when my dad came home. And I got his primary care doctor, and he said, what if your dad were to get cancer? Would you put him through fighting the cancer? I said, well, we didn't make it as far as we did through brain injury to let something else come in here and take his life. Of course we would. Well, he had an opinion about that. And I had to very directly tell him, you're either going to be on board with what my care plan is for my dad, or I'm going to find another doctor. And then we got along perfectly fine after that. It's having
Right.
to have the courageousness to know nobody knows 100% of anything that's going to happen in this lifetime except for God. So you do not just take everybody's word as is and advocate for yourself. It's such an important thing to do. When you talk about, there's obviously the ebbs and flows of going through the cancer part of it itself. What was that journey like for you?
Brutal at times, and I did have a pretty good cross section. Now, spoiler alert, as of January, mid-January, so going on 4 months now, I have found out that I am completely cancer free and clean. Come back at some point. But yeah, thank you very
Okay.
much. But
Congratulations. That's awesome.
yeah, third, and that was mid-January, and at Christmas time, I was in the hospital to have a surgery that didn't go well, which was very typical for me and my experience. And I truly believed I had ceased all treatment about a year ago, a little less than a year ago now, and just it had beaten me to such a pulp. But there was a tumor in my belly that needed to come out, and like I said, it didn't go well. I really did believe when I went into the hospital a couple days before Christmas that it was 2026 was easily my last year above ground. And now I tell my kids, my two adult daughters, that I'm going to be attending their funerals one day. Um, and but no, to answer your question, just for context, my journey, which is coming up on 4 years now, and that's just the cancer part of things, has involved four major surgeries, 34 rounds of chemotherapy that included about 80, well, not about, I counted up exactly 81 different medicines, 5 rounds of radiation. It's been a walk through hell, a lot of ups and downs, um, a lot of difficulty. I am doing really remarkably well, although I will say that I mean, let's face it, stage 4 cancer, nobody ever said it should be fun. It's beaten the holy hell out of me physically and mentally.
Mhm.
I'm in a very good place, and I always have been very good place mentally, but it does take a heavy toll on you. And I mean, this is kind of what part of what inspired me to write a book. There are very specific things that people can do to mitigate that difficulty, and make things much easier on themselves when they're going through, whether it's cancer or just whatever it is in life, because there's a tendency for people like me who've dealt with a lot of health issues and that type of thing to feel like we're the only people in the world that have ever had any hardship. And oh my God, is that not, nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, it's interesting hearing your story, Darcie, just a little bit. I would say, having been on the side of the table that I've been on for such a big chunk of my life so many times, that we sick people have it downright easy compared to those of you who support us. It's usually the spouse or the adult child or partner, not always, but there is so much that goes onto the shoulders of the people who are supporting the person dealing with the illness. They make wonderful medicines. I started talking early on in my cancer situation about cancer privilege. And it was semi-joking, but going, look, if I decided to be an asshole, um, everybody go, well, he's got cancer, it's okay. Or if I decided to just not show up to this podcast today, well, he's a cancer patient, so everybody wants to cut you slack. Well, that has to be picked up by somebody, and it's usually the person, like I said, often the spouse, the adult child, or somebody like that who picks up the tab. or picks up that slack, I guess I should say, for the person dealing with the difficulty. And when I say the difficulty, it's obviously a shared difficulty, and you know that very, very well with what you've dealt with.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. I mean, I love how you point that out, right? Because, I mean, I remember the doctors telling me at one point, you need to go home and sleep. Your dad's not even going to remember the majority of this because he's in a coma. And I
Yeah.
was so adamant, I don't care because I'm not going to ever allow anybody to hurt my dad ever again after what happened. And he couldn't defend himself. I mean, it was a thing. So yeah, thanks for recognizing that, because I think that people that are supporting their loved ones or do become caregivers or advocates or guardians or all of the labels, right? That they don't expect to be recognized for doing such a thing. I mean, I just thought, well, of course I'm taking care of my dad. He's my dad. Well, not everybody thinks like that though, and then secondly, when you said, that you could use certain things as an excuse. Well, I'm an asshole right now because, or I didn't show up, and I'm an NLP practitioner. And in
Okay.
my field, what we call that is secondary gain. That is secondary gain. And it's funny because a lot of people do not realize like the terminology of that. And I just was talking about this on a podcast the other day of why some people continue to stay stuck where they are, because then they can say, well, of course I act like this. My dad just died 7 months ago. And it's like, well, and I understand that these hard things are happening, but even during hard times, we still have a consciousness, right? Where we're able to make appropriate decisions. So it was funny to me that you said that, because I was like, oh yeah, people like to use that a lot of times.
Well, and I say that tongue in cheek because I have known some people who and I won't name any names or anything. I won't even hint. But I've known some people who have used their illnesses as a means to take advantage of people and to
Mm-hmm.
manipulate and that type of thing. And that heavily influenced how I handled my situation here with my cancer in particular. But then again, you hit on something I think really important, and something that I talk about in my book and I talk about in my talks quite often, and that is we get wrapped up in the victimhood of things, and in our culture, let's face it, and this is where I ruffle a lot of feathers. Victimhood is the highest status, has emerged as the highest status really in our culture. It's a very sought after status. And if you try to tell somebody that they're not the victim they claim to be, and victimhood comes in a lot of different forms, and it shows up a lot of subtle and insidious ways, but it's all the same thing or different versions of the same thing. And what I find interesting is if part of telling somebody or coaching somebody, if you will, to being empowered, which they are, it's amazing to me that rarely gets met with gratitude. It's met with hostility typically, because how dare you take my victimhood I mean, they don't articulate it obviously like that, but you're taking, people use victimhood as a power play
Mm-hmm.
and get a lot of shit from their victimhood.
Mm-hmm.
And if you try to take that away from them and tell them, no, you're not a victim, you're actually empowered to do things on your own and whatnot, you're taking something very comforting away from somebody. And that doesn't usually get met, like I said. In fact, almost never does it get initially met with, hey, thank you very much for empowering me. It's how dare you tell me that I'm not a victim. And it's very telling.
Yeah, what a great point to make. I mean, when you were saying it, because I can relate, it's like taking their like favorite stuffed animal from them, like their comfort thing for them. And it's interesting to me because I've only been working on my self-healing journey for 10 months.
Okay.
So I went through childhood trauma, I went through teenagehood things, and really compound trauma, just thing after thing after thing that are people hear it and they're like, really? I mean, that happened? Yes, that happened. And these are all things that some of my siblings used as reasons to do dumb shit. And it's like you can't say you're using drugs because of what our parents did. You're using drugs because you're choosing to use drugs. Or my brother, I drink because of what dad did. No, you drink because you're an alcoholic. So, my feathers are already fluffed because, I already know. I say this on my podcast all the time. This is probably going to piss a couple people off. It is because when we get faced with our own accountability and the things that we can control in our life, and all of those fingers start to point back at you, you start to really consider what part did you play in the things that are happening in your life? Because not everybody can use these reasonings to continue to do the bad behavior, to continue to live in that lane. Yes, I can imagine Mark first getting diagnosed with cancer is scary and it's terrifying, and you need time, you need to process. But this is another thing I say, there's no time limit on healing or grief, but there is a time limit on our life. And the longer that we stay very much stuck in this trauma instead of grounded in healing, the amount of time that's wasted is just exponential.
Well, you bring up a number of points here when you mention accountability. That's a big part of it, but that also hints at why it's such a difficult thing to wrestle somebody's victimhood away from them. Accountability is not really a fun process.
No.
Self-accountability. It's wonderful when you can hold somebody else accountable for something, but then again, that's a glimpse of victimhood creeping back in. But the other thing is, as you're talking about, the drug addiction, well, my dad or alcoholism, my dad, like my dad was an alcoholic as well. But that's the thing about victimhood is it's very comfortable. It is like a stuffed animal. I love that analogy that you used because when it's in the victimhood status, it's always somebody else's fault. It's you externalize what's going on in your world. So it's not me that needs to change. It's everybody else that needs to change. Well, that ain't the way the world actually works in reality. Is if you want change, the only person you can change or the only one you can change is yourself. And that's an uncomfortable process for anybody to go through. So I salute you and congratulate you while saying I'm very sorry for what led to the trauma and everything. I share a lot of that with you, but I congratulate you and commend you for having the courage to face up and start healing because it does take courage.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's scary. I mean, I learned at the age of 39 that I was an enabler. I mean, it was like, what? I thought I was loving people better. Like, what are you saying to me? Like, it's really a journey to go. That's why I say you're being grounded in healing.
Yeah.
Like I'm forever going to be healing from the things I went through in my whole past, but in particular, losing my dad's the hardest thing that I've ever experienced in my life this far. I do know that life is going to continue to challenge me though, because if it didn't, nobody would be here. This is what life is. It's like one big
Yeah.
challenge, one big test, and how you how you choose to make it through it is how you choose to make it through it. So you're sitting here now making it through all of the things, and you wrote a book. Tell me, what is the book called? What's it about?
Yeah, the book is entitled Rock Bottom to Resilient, Transform Your Mind. I'm having to look over here to remind myself of the subtitle here. Even though I wrote it, sometimes I have to remind myself. Transform your mind and become unshakable when the shit hits the fan. And I've had a few shit hit the fan moments in my life, not just with health, but I struggled all the way through childhood, teenage years, adolescence, and I was caught in the victimhood thing that I talk about. So that's the reason I know it so well is because I was that victim that was clinging to my victimhood status, and it was very, very difficult on me for the first part of my adult life, and then something began shifting there, and it was really when cancer hit. I did a lot of self-reflecting because I realized fairly quickly that I had developed almost a personal brand around the fact that I was very positive through this. Well, first of all, I had a cheat code because cancer was definitely far from my first go around with life-threatening illness or life-threatening anything for that matter there. So I had seen this movie before, and I think that plays into it. But what it did is it caused me to get really, like I said, self-reflective because I thought I sure as hell wasn't like this for the first 40 years of my life, most likely, or for the most part. And I started taking inventory about why, and even my oncologist said, look, your mindset did more for you than, well, as much, I guess I should amend what I'm saying here, did as much for me as anything that modern medicine did. So I appreciated that validation and that nod. But I talk about a number of things in the book. It's available on Amazon. So not to self-promote, but if somebody is curious, this is what the cover looks like. Um, but I did a lot of things, and I talk about I use the analogy trash in the book, which stands for tactical vulnerability, radical responsibility, which is, by the way, is a fancy way of eliminating the victimhood status from your life. Attitude aerobics, which are just some daily gratitudes and kindness things that can reset the mindset. Um, uh, uh, Healing, using humor as a tool, and then I skipped over the S. That's supportive village. Just having built a support system around you, understand that no person is an island, and begin building the support system around you as early in life, but do it uh, intentionally. It's better to have a very small or one of the right person than to have this great big circle around you that isn't made up of the right kind of people. So
Yeah.
I get into a lot of that in the book and some other things that sort of set the foundation for all of that.
I love that. And I know my listeners are like, I say this all the time because God is just sending me like the right people for what my jam is here at the School of Hard Knocks, because it's everybody who's grounded in healing. And you can tell when people are grounded in healing by the verbiage that they use and the way that they talk. So right away, when you go into your analogy, I'm like, Mark uses tools. And that's what I talk about because I created a trauma toolbox. So I talk about my trauma
Okay.
toolbox and the different tools that are inside of what I call my very unique pink, shiny, glittery, because that's me, toolbox. But the tools are ones that I can pull out in moments when I'm backsliding, thinking about the things with my dad, the trauma, the pain, whatever, or current day things that are happening. Because I mean, life is hard and things happen, and maybe you're running late and the red light's taking so long, and you're like, oh my gosh, your eyes twitching. What are you going to do? Pull a tool out and calm down. Like everything is going to be okay.
Love that.
So I love talking to people that actually use tools because I don't think a lot of people understand once you have these in your mind, you are really setting yourself up for success with a lot of different things that are going to come at you as this world continues to turn. But to just go into a blind or I'll just deal with it when it happens and figure it out, you're going to deal with a lot more pain than the person who has tools readily available.
Very well said, Darcie. Yeah, tools. I hadn't thought of it in that vernacular, I guess, is the right way to say that. But yeah, tools. I mean, if you have, look, I consider myself at this point to be a pretty positive and resilient person. I still have difficult days, difficult times within a day, difficult weeks. It's just I know now how to dig myself out of it and not wallow in it. Because, look, I mean, this became very, very clear when I was dealing with the cancer, but I think it's true of everybody that walks down the street or the face of the earth, because nobody, or I should say few people, have the affliction that there's just too much easiness in their world. Okay, a
Yeah.
few people do have that. but we all need some of these tools. But one of the things that I sort of discovered is um, to be caught up in things. There's a tendency for that victimhood to start creeping in if you don't have a way to properly deal with that and empower yourself, which again, like we talked about, is an uncomfortable process. But the
Mhm.
flip side of that is it takes so damn much energy to be angry about things or to be resentful or to be in a state of fear, or all of those negative, mindset states, and to be stressed out. It just takes so much energy. And that became glaringly obvious during a time when I've always, in spite of all of the health issues, I've always been a pretty high energy individual. And I was going through a very long stretch where just because of the disease, I didn't have much energy. I sure as hell didn't want to use up what little I had on the fear and the resentment and the feeling sorry for myself and all of those, what I'll say, unproductive and negative type emotional states.
Yeah, and I like that. I like how you said, like, for me, it's okay to give yourself grace and to have a moment, right? I mean, nobody can just brush stuff underneath the rug, and we wouldn't recommend doing that anyways, because how are you ever making it through it? So I call it my reboot time. When my dad first got shot up to this point, I thought that I had dealt with trauma in my life, but that was absolutely terrifying. And I remember at the beginning, COVID happened. So all of the facilities shut down. So I couldn't even be with them. And I felt extremely
Right.
helpless. So, like, laying on my back on the sofa, staring at the ceiling for days, just numb. No, there was no feeling. I was in such disbelief that what was happening was actually happening. Now, after going through what I've gone through and creating the toolbox that I use for myself, I call it my reboot time. And when something gets me activated, I can reboot in 15 minutes or less. That's just what it is because I have found tools that work for me. I share tools with everybody, and whether they have to tweak it or the same exact thing works, great. And then they're ever evolving and changing because then something's going to happen that I've never experienced before. I unfortunately found my dad, no longer breathing and tried to
Wow.
save him. Not a good morning. Very, very hard morning, right? And I
Can't
kept
even.
playing that over in my head. Like I couldn't. It was like a loop. And I told my husband, man, I got to figure out a different tool because this is not, I'm like, I want to just go dark because I can't stop thinking about it. And then I started thinking about like things that brought me like made me laugh a little bit. And I got stuck on like Beverly Hills Cop with Axel Foley when he kind of mocks that one cop and says, "You're not going to fall for the banana in the tailpipe tray." and, and then I
Yes.
started, then I started thinking about like Pretty Woman and like some of my movies, like Roadhouse, like and things that I like. And I'm like, oh, I changed the scary movie in my head. And boom, ever since then, I barely even, I mean, it's such a brilliant tool that now it'll be 7 months on Thursday since my dad went to heaven. And honestly, I'm so much more okay than I thought that I was ever going to be. And it's using the tools.
And I love it. I really do. Because the flip side or the far end of I talk about resilience and positive mindset and mental toughness. I use them all sort of interchangeably, even though I guess technically they mean different things. But the far end of that is the toxic positivity, where you say, well, you just won't acknowledge the downside and the depression, and you never let yourself get depressed. Well, that's BS. That's not real world. The world is things do come along, things do knock us on our ass emotionally, physically, whatever. They do require some processing. Even now, lately, I've been dealing with a downtick in my mental energy because I have been working so hard since getting a clean bill of health and having physical energy and mental energy return that I have burned myself so much. Look, I do need a little bit of battery recharge time, especially given what I've been through. But I love the way you use humor because that's something I'm a huge advocate of, and I don't mind taking it as it relates to myself. to an inappropriate, I'll air quote
Yeah.
because I'm talking about myself here. I was working at a car dealership. I'll just tell you this real quick story. And by the way, just for context, many, many years ago, I was talking to somebody who was a nurse at in the emergency room at Chicago Children's Hospital, and oh boy, were there some stories there. But one of the things she shared is she said how we deal, so the burnout rate is extraordinarily high, but one of the ways we deal with the things that we have to deal with is through humor, and it's dark humor at that. That, if you're not part of our group and not dealing with things we deal with day to day, you would be so likely so offended by the things that we talk about in our safe spaces and stuff like that. Well, that always kind of stuck with me, and it was one of the ways that I dealt with people. Most of the people very close with me dealt with my cancer. Anyway, I started to say that I was working at a car dealership part time, and one of my college friends was going to come in dressed as a Grim Reaper, and just stand at my desk with a sickle and everything. We had this whole thing, and we even had some management buy-in, and we decided, wait a minute, we don't know who else this may bother. Because there are some people even close to me in my family that don't like my poking fun at my own mortality very much. So I'm realizing there's a lot of people out there that don't understand what it is that I'm doing and would be offended. So we decided not to do that. But I joke around about as it relates to myself pretty openly. And I think, humor is a very subjective thing. What one person finds hilarious, another person may find very, very off-putting. But it's one of the single greatest tools you can use for very difficult times. It's just diffusing that, and it's universal too.
Yeah, it's so funny because I actually just had somebody that was on my podcast recently, Aggie Park. Hi, Aggie. But I got this cute little book that she sent me in the mail. It's all pink and it's all shiny. But she had to say, hope this brightens up your days with much joy and sparkles, just as you are brightening up the world with your joy, kindness, and humor. Because when I was on her podcast, I kind of, obviously talked about me because I'm on her podcast. And I talked about the day that my dad was shot. And my dad was the head groundskeeper at the cemetery. And my sister called from out of state and said, did you, I can't even say without laughing now. And it's just so dark. Like, sorry, but it's just freaking funny to me. But she calls and goes, did you hear that they found a dead body at Dad's cemetery? I'm like, Lindsay, they're all dead there. It's a cemetery. She's like, oh, but really, like a new one. It's like, but that's just that is how my dad used to teach us, to deal with different things. And it just feels good. Like laughter just makes like all of this adrenaline go and your dopamine's released. And it's just such a good feeling. So if you're somebody who gets offended by that, but you have somebody in your life that's going through something, let them have that. Because the feeling that they have when they are able to find a way to laugh, laughter is literally one of the best ways to medicate yourself. It just feels good.
100%, Darcie, 100%.
Yeah, so I definitely get it. Well, Mark, if people want to come and follow you, find you, where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Just look up my name, Mark Light, on LinkedIn, and on Facebook. That's more of a personal crowd, but I do have a lot of people who I don't know personally that I interact with. You can go to marklightgroup.com if you want to learn more about what it is that I do or things that I'm working on. So yeah, or you can just shoot me an email if anybody wants to chat. I find that it's one of those parts of the cancer journey is a lot of people reach out when they're dealing with something or they're finding out that a family member or themselves are dealing with something cancer related. And I do get a lot of people. So Mark at marklightgroup.com, shoot me an email if you just want to chat.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me today and sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Darcie. It's been fun.
Great. Well, hey, you guys, you know what to do. When you are done watching this episode, go and find Mark on all of the platforms, like, love, follow, share, do all of the things. There's more than enough room at the top of this mountain for all of us. And as always, when you are walking with the Lord, healing is always possible. I'll see you guys in the next episode. I'd like to thank you for sharing your time with me today. And I'm so proud of you for stepping into your healing journey. Please share this with every single person that you know. I'm here to make the biggest impact possible, and I can only do that with you by my side. I hope you hit that follow button and you save me to your library so you never miss an episode. We just took another break out of your wall, and remember, with God, healing is always possible. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.